Back in 1999, my son Louis was taken from his room in the middle of the night. My wife Kelsey and I were sitting downstairs watching television when my son's scream rattled the entire house. It was a sound that I continued to hear every minute of every day. When we ran into his room, everything appeared to be normal. There wasn't even a single wrinkle on his bedspread. The only thing missing was him. Shortly after, life became a living hell. The authorities questioned us relentlessly about his disappearance, and I don't blame them for their ruthless persistence. What had happened simply couldn't be explained, and if I were the detectives, I would have thought my wife. And I did it too. That's what the rest of the community thought. The mystery surrounding the case drove me insane. Every day we had reporters beating down our doors demanding answers about my son's disappearance. Having those vultures swarm my home enlightened me to a definition of hate that I did not understand, a hate so pure that murder was constantly on my mind. Everywhere I turned, stories of my son were painted across the front pages of local news outlets, Louis's name printed in bold, the town gazette constantly printing pictures of Kelsey, and I, wet with tears at our absolute worst, tossing them on the porches of every home in our community. I couldn't escape. The agony of the situation slowly tore my marriage apart. Kelsey left her job and never went back. Her full-time gig became spending her days crying on the couch. It was harrowing. As for me, I would be a liar if I didn't say I became acquainted with the taste of gunmetal on a few occasions. Every day felt like my heart was being trampled, squeezed in a vice, and robbing me of my oxygen. Life was misery. Misery was life. The depression that painted the walls of our house quickly seeped into our pores, causing routine fights between my wife and I. We were each other's safety nets, but we began taking every opportunity we could to take a razor to the webbing. At first the fights were monthly, then weekly, until the screaming and vicious altercations became a daily event. When we decided to separate, my world imploded. Kelsey was my everything. The love for one another ran so deep, but my son's disappearance proved to be enough heat to dry up the well. For a while, we spoke on the phone every now and then, always a great conversation, but when we discussed the possibility of getting together, we both agreed the encounter would resurface far too much pain. Somewhere inside of me there is still love for her, and I frequently fantasize about us being together again one day. After some time, the calls became less frequent. I haven't heard from her in years, although the memories of Louis's disappearance and my failed marriage continued to find their way through the locked doors of my mind. I allowed myself to enjoy life again. The gray veil that had been cast over my days was slowing, allowing the brilliant and bright colors to shine through. My mental health was trending upward, and smiles and laughter were reintroducing themselves into my life. Living had once again become a pleasurable experience. Yesterday evening, I was enjoying my evening at home, cooking myself dinner and blasting music throughout the house. Music always made home feel less empty. Through the sounds of the bass rattling the walls, the pattering from the kitchen, and my loud, clumsy feet dancing across the hardwood, I thought I heard a knock at the door. I turned down the music and looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 8:30 and already pitch black. I stopped my breathing to listen in closely. The knocking rattled the door once more. I'll be the first to admit that when an unsolicited knocker comes to my door, I immediately turn into a wimp and go into hiding. A grown man cowering behind his kitchen counter, afraid of the knock at the door. What a sight. I patiently waited while crouched down on my kitchen floor, hoping to hear nothing but silence. When the doorbell rang, I recoiled, my heart unsure if it wanted to continue beating. Waiting it out until the person on the other side went away was no longer an option. The rapping became quicker and louder, my heart beating in synchrony with the rapid knocks. The knocks turned into pounding, causing the keys hung next to the door to rattle and decor on the shelf to shift. I thought the door was about to blow off its hinges. I grabbed my chef's knife, stuck it between my belt, and swallowed my anxiety. I ran toward the door with such ferocity, ready to attack whatever was on the other side. I put my hand on the doorknob and felt the energy from the other side transfer into my bloodstream and pulsate behind my eyes. When I opened the door, I felt the heat from my body get sucked out through my feet and into the ground. My skin was instantly chilled by the cool streams of sweat pouring from every pore, dampening my clothes. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. I couldn't feel. On the other side of the door was my son. He hadn't aged a day. I am unsure if there is a word for simultaneously feeling confused, terrified, nauseous, dizzy, weak, sad, and surprised, but the words messed up will do for now. The sight of my son had me messed up. My vision began to blur, only having his pupils in my focus. Everything around his eyes was total darkness. My knees trembled, and my balance began to shift. The last thing I remembered after opening the door was Louis reaching for me as I fell backwards, and the buzzing between my ears as my head struck the floor. When I came to, I was already sitting up. The room felt like it was floating on water as I tried to get to my feet with great difficulty, using my sea legs to regain balance. The terrible pain in my head convinced me my brain was trying to break free from my skull. The smell of burning food crawled through my nose. As the room began to level out, I called for my son's name. Silence. It all felt so real, but then again, so does insanity. There was just no way, no explanation. It had been nearly 25 years since I last saw him, and there he was, at my door, with the fairest of skin, baby fat still filling out his cheeks, beautifully blue, and large eyes that his face had yet to grow into. It was my baby boy, one foot in front of the other, walking an invisible tightrope in my concussed state. I went from room to room searching for him. Each time I called Louis's name, and for each room I found empty, insanity became a much more plausible answer. I walked upstairs, careful not to fall back down the way I came, and headed down the hall. His bedroom door was open. I stood outside his room staring into the darkness, too afraid to walk inside. I was terrified at the thought of walking into another empty room, accepting that my mind was slipping, but equally terrified of finding him sleeping soundly in his bed. Until that point, I had not gone inside Louis's room for 20 years. The last time I paid his room a visit, I didn't leave his bed for 3 days after learning that memory lane didn't always have paved roads and sunny skies. As I opened the door with my breath held tight, the light from the hallway cast itself onto the back of his head lying peacefully in bed. I sat down gently on the side of his bed, my aged knees cracking as I sunk into the mattress. The sound of Louis's breathing tugged on emotions I didn't know I had. I placed my hand on his back to feel the heartbeat of a life I thought I had lost. What I knew about religion, God, science, reality, it had all been twisted and flipped upside down when he showed up at my door. All I could do in that moment was stare at my 30-year-old son, tucked into his faded race car sheets, wearing the same pajamas as the night he disappeared. The light from the hallway began to fade as the sunlight from the window progressively brightened the room. Throughout the entire night, I sat there watching my son with marvel. I had no idea what to do. What could I do? Nothing about what happened that night was normal. I took my phone from my pocket. It was the first time throughout the night I took my eyes off Louis. I scrolled through my contacts until I saw Kelsey's name. Attached to her contact info was a picture of her from right after she had Louis. I looked at her picture, hand on my forehead, wondering what her face would look like as I told her Louis was laying in bed right next to me. I wondered how she had aged throughout the years, and what kind of person she had become. I wondered what life would have been like today if Louis had never disappeared. My thumb hovered over the dial button with paralysis. I had no idea what to say. There was no way to dress up the words to explain that our son had returned. We hadn't spoken in years, and I was about to give her a call and say what? Hey Kelsey, how have things been? Oh yeah. Oh, and by the way, our son came home. Yeah, right. There was no plan, no perfect speech to give. I pressed the dial button. No answer. I took a picture of Louis sleeping in bed and sent it to Kelsey. I have no explanation, but Louis came back. Please call me. Laying at the foot of Louis's bed waiting for her call, my eyes became heavy. I began fading in and out, and right as I was about to cross over into unconsciousness, that's when I heard the whisper, "Don't call mommy." A loud crash came from downstairs. Louis was gone. The body's reaction to fear caused by an external source in the moment of crossing into unconsciousness is unparalleled. The slowing of the heart rate met with fight or flight dropping by to give you an adrenaline dump is a speedball that would make a seasoned junkie weary. It's a feeling that's alarming enough to make you wonder if you briefly took death's hand on the dance floor. I've never been a go investigate the odd sound kind of guy. Waking up to the loud crash from downstairs and Lewis suddenly missing from bed made me wonder just how badly a light would break jumping from a second-story window. The second question was how fast and far could I run on it? The audience watching from my subconscious screamed and pleaded with me to run away as I walked down the hall to head downstairs. With each step I took down the staircase, I stopped to listen. Although I didn't hear anything, I was more concerned about Lewis hearing me. His return felt like a wild animal was let loose in my house, something with unpredictable thoughts and movements. I've seen videos and pictures of parents reuniting with their lost children, videos full of hugs and tears of joy. It kills me that I cannot be one of them. Something about Lewis made me want to watch him, study him. When I reached the bottom step, I peeked my head around the walls to scan the lower level. Nothing seemed to be out of place. I stepped down onto the floor, and outside the concealment of the stairway walls, I was committed. My teeth were going to crack at any moment under the pressure of my clenched jaw. The tension in my body stiffened my stride as I forced myself to move forward. I walked into the kitchen, and my body responded as if Arctic temperatures burst through my home. The kitchen was destroyed. Every cabinet and drawer were wide open. Food was all over the floor, crystallized with broken glass. Standing in the middle of the chaos was Lewis, mouth agape, panting heavily and staring at the ceiling. "Lewis," I asked. The word coated my tongue with a thick layer of rust. It was the first word I said to him in 25 years. I wasn't sure if I liked the sound of it coming from my mouth. Lewis was unresponsive, his gaze fixed to a single point on the ceiling. His chest violently quaked as the cadence of his panting escalated. Like father, like son, I was helpless. I traipsed through the field of glass and put my hands on Lewis's shoulders. He was ice cold. I called his name, trying to snap him out of whatever was stealing his attention. I shook him, hoping it would bring him back. My voice went hoarse as I yelled into his little ears. I pulled him close to me, his soft body up against mine, bringing me back to days of laughter and smiles when he would nestle himself between the safety of Kelsey and me. His dilated eyes went straight through me, staring at a great distance. Then the panting stopped. His pupils constricted and fixed onto mine. "Buddy," I said. He opened his mouth wide, and from somewhere deep inside him, the most horrific scream reverberated off the walls and burrowed into my ears. My kneecaps came unglued, and my body recoiled right before I momentarily lost all motor functions. I collapsed, crashing into the shards of glass scattered on the floor. The lacerations to my exposed skin served as a welcome distraction from Lewis's mania. The pain dampened the sound. I lied on the floor, terror-stricken by Lewis's screams, the shards of glass working deeper into my skin. With each scream Lewis belted out, I moved 1 inch back, the drops of blood pooling underneath me assisting my glide. One after the other, the screams became an endless loop, and for each one, the shriek became louder. My body was overstimulated. The deafening of the screams, the glass in my back, the terror on Lewis's face. I came undone. "Stop, God damn it. Stop it. Stop." My screaming challenged Lewis's. In a momentary lapse of sanity, my whole body convulsed as I shouted and begged for the sideshow to draw its curtain. The sides of my fists beat the floor, adding to the collection of cuts across my body. Lewis became blue in the face, his eyes starting to fade. His screams turned to breathy howls as his vocal cords began to give way. A wobble developed in his posture, and Lewis crashed onto the floor. I continued to lay on the floor for I don't know how long. An emotional levee broke in my brain, and I burst into tears. I was hysterical. I had always hoped Lewis would return and continue adding blessing to my life, but from the moment he arrived, his presence had only compounded the nightmares surrounded by his disappearance. I was tired, and my body was in a great deal of pain. I was breaking. I had no idea what to do, no course of action, nobody to call. It felt like the only options I had were to call the authorities, contact a doctor, or get AC Priest over to the house. All I wanted was the best for Lewis, and each one of those people would inevitably pick up the phone and open their mouths wide enough for reporters to start prying their unwanted noses back into my life. The circus would return to town and cast me as the main event, with 24-hour media coverage ruining my already ruined life. I didn't want to become the next Netflix special. Although Lewis had come back into my life By way of miracle, I had never felt so alone. I had nobody I could trust and could turn to in my desperate need of help. I needed Kelsey. There was no way she would know what to do in this situation, but we could be lost together. We could figure everything out as a family again. Lewis deserved to have mommy and daddy back in his life after being away for so long. I scooped Lewis off the floor, placed him on the couch, and spent the next hour picking glass out of my arms and the parts of my back I could reach. During that time, I relentlessly called Kelsey, sent texts, and left voicemails. She didn't answer any of my calls. I wasn't ready to be a single father. I could see it in my mind. Kelsey, Lewis, and me sitting in front of the fireplace on Christmas Eve watching movies and sharing stories. Laughter at the dinner table. Kelsey and I, arms around each other, listening to Lewis tell us about his day at school. It was beautiful. After so many years of living in a dark shadow cast by grief, I finally had something to look forward to. My cheeks, no longer used for carrying the weight of a smile, became sore by the small grin the thoughts provided. Kelsey lived 5 hours away. I needed to get to her. Lewis laid stiff on the couch. It was going to be a long drive for him. The longest drive he had ever been on was the one a month, 45-minute trek to his grandmother's, which always proved to be a grueling experience for him. My God, what she would have done to see her grandbaby just one more time. I went to Lewis's room to pack him a light bag for the trip, just enough to get him through a few days at Kelsey's. Our first family outing could have been going out together to buy him a new, up-to-date wardrobe. I had no idea what kids were currently into, and didn't want him to feel alienated among his peers. When I opened his drawer, the musty smell from his Power Rangers and Nickelodeon shirts hit me in the face. The nostalgia had me choking back tears. Lewis called me from downstairs. He said one word, "Dad." That was me. I was a dad again. I ran downstairs to see him. "Hey buddy, how are you feeling?" I asked. "Good. I'm hungry," said Lewis. "Are you?" "Okay, well this is what we are going to do. We are going to go on a little trip, and we will pick up some food along the way. How does that sound? We're going to go to see mommy. She's going to be so excited to see you." I don't think we should do that. I didn't entirely disagree with them. Mentally, I knew I was stronger than Kelsey, and the sight of Lewis could have very well cost her a year's wage in therapy. Her mental health may have gotten far worse before it ever got better, but family always prevails, and I would have been her pillar of support every step of the way. Lewis and I went back and forth, his attitude souring at the thought of seeing Kelsey. No matter what I said, he continued to debate and reason with me. When I scooped him up to put him in the car, he threw a fit, kicking and screaming. He begged me not to go. As we hit the road, the pleading didn't stop. It was just like Lewis. He would never stop until he got his way. I blamed Kelsey for spoiling him. If he had only known how many gifts his mother was going to shower him with, his attitude would have quickly changed. 25 minutes into the drive, and Lewis wouldn't give it up. It was going to be a long 5 hours. I was running on no sleep and had the worst headache from my head bouncing off the floor. My back against the car seat drove each little piece of glass I missed further into my skin. 2 towns over was a McDonald's right off the highway, and a park a short ways down. My parents had taken me there on long drives to pump me full of food and wear me out to buy a little silence for themselves on the journey. I wasn't much better than Lewis. After we got our McDonald's, arguably the slowest form of suicide, and also the best tasting, we pulled into the park. It was just how I remembered it. Standing in the center was a huge wooden fortress full of slides, ladders, twists, and turns, just waiting for any child to go in, get lost, and cut their chins open after knocking their heads a few times. Lewis and I ate our food at a shaded park bench while we watched the kids play. I could tell he was getting restless, eager to move his little legs and explore. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think this is a good idea. I think we should go back home." "Oh, come on, bud," I said. "It'll be alright. Really bad things are going to happen." "Dad," I couldn't help but laugh. The poor kid was as nervous as any child would be having to go introduce themselves to a new group of kids. The playground was where personalities were made. I picked up Lewis and began carrying him to the center of the action. It was a great opportunity for character development. Lewis needed to join the laughter and the fun. To get Lewis warmed up, I pushed him on the swing. His hair blew in the wind as he let out bursts of excited laughter. At the apex of his climb, he could see the rest of the kids watching him in awe, just watching how high he went. Also watching were the parents with their mouths wide open, likely sharing horror stories of kids getting injured by irresponsible parents putting too much gusto into their pushes. After the swings, I brought him to the slide, the old steelback Skinner. All the kids and parents on the playground were motionless watching Lewis, the king of the playground, having the best time of his life. By the time Lewis had gone down the slide 7 or 8 times, I was exhausted. Being the old dad was a tough job and damn near impossible to keep up. I climbed my way through the wooden fortress, dodging a few of the other children along the way, and grabbed Lewis. It was time for old dad to take a breather, and Lewis to come out of his shell and play with the other kids. Lewis was apprehensive as I sat him down next to the kids. The kids all went silent and stared. "Go on," I said, "introduce yourself." I gave Lewis a little nudge. "Hi," Lewis said reluctantly, "I'm Lewis." The children stood there completely frozen. "Will you play with me?" Lewis asked. In unison, like a well-rehearsed choir, the children began crying and yelling, sprinting towards their parents. Total chaos broke out on the playground. A parent running toward his child pointed at me and screamed, "Hey, you, get the hell away from my kid." I was so taken back. Maybe the rules had changed during the hiatus of my parenting years. Perhaps it was unethical for a parent to be on the playground. A man continued to charge toward me. I grabbed Lewis and put him into my arms. "Now hold on just a second," I said. The man didn't listen. Like the bully of the playground, the man laid into me and sent me to the ground, crushing Lewis. Lewis yelped and began to cry. That bastard hurt my son, and I had waited far too long to have him back in my life for some punk to cause him pain. The rage in my heart made the blood in my veins scald my organs. I got to my feet and stared the man in the eyes. In his soul I saw every reporter who made my life hell, every detective that wanted to lock me up, every piece of trash that convinced Kelsey to leave. I reached my fist as far back as my old body would allow and cranked the man in the mouth. The man took a knee. As I swung my leg back, Lewis begged me to stop. Feeling a man's head connect with your foot isn't what you'd expect. It's like kicking a soccer ball. If half of it was filled with the lead, and the other half a dark warm liquid that will easily stain your clothes. I lost my boy once, and I wasn't going to let anyone hurt him ever again. I don't know what got into me, but I just kept kicking. I kept kicking until he stopped moving. The parents from afar held their shaking, traumatized children in their arms. They were on their cell phones pointing at me, describing me. It was time to go. I grabbed Lewis by the arm and dragged him through the grass, running as fast as I could without his arm popping out of his socket. He was scared. I was scared. We got to the car, put it into gear, and peeled out of the parking lot. "Dad, you need to turn yourself in before more people get hurt," Lewis said through a fit of tears. "It's okay, buddy. Everything is going to be all right. That man tried to hurt you. I'm never going to let anyone hurt you again." When I held Lewis in my arms for the first time and saw his eyes connect with mine, something inside me had changed. The metamorphosis of a man's body and mind when holding his newborn for the first time is extraordinary. The life force of a father and child, flesh and flesh, deploys an inseparable magnetization that only the strongest love can create. I was him, he was me. Love took on a whole new meaning the day he was born. Never before had I felt a sensation so powerful, a sensation that would inspire a civil man to spill blood for the protection of their child. I loved him more than I loved myself. I would have died 1,000 agonizing deaths if it meant Lewis would feel no pain. When Lewis disappeared, I died an agonizing death every hour of the day, and continued to do so for the past 25 years, each death more painful than the last. Misery, seeing the parents at the park playing with their kids, smiles and laughs filling the air, it infuriated me. My emotions were misplaced and unjust. I was jealous and had no right to be angry. Their families knew no pain, and seeing them take their lives for granted made me want to get on my soapbox and beg them to enjoy every moment with their children. They could never know what real love felt like until they lost what they assumed would be a permanent fixture in their life. The blood stain on my shoe symbolized the purity and strength of my love. God, did it feel good to love again. I slid my fingers across my stained shoe and rubbed them together, meditating on the sensation of my fingers sliding with ease. It made the bond between Lewis and I feel stronger. The parents back at the park may have never seen a love so strong, which would have explained their off-putting reactions. I didn't want to live in a world where a man couldn't protect his son from a psychopath willing to cause harm to a man holding his precious boy. That man knew no love, and I am saddened that he had to find out what real love felt like. Lewis was bawling in the back seat, repeatedly asking if I had killed that man, shouting that I shouldn't have hurt him. I felt awful that I had elicited such emotions from him, but he was too young to understand the difference between vengeance and justice. In vengeance, there is no love, unlike in justice. Through Lewis's wails and tears, a smile slowly grew on my face. I became excited at what Lewis was going to think of me as soon as he calmed down and rationalized the situation. I was going to be super dad, the best dad ever, the strongest dad in his world, protecting him from trouble all around. Since the moment I felt his skin on mine, all I wanted was to be his superhero, and that's what I had just become. The hypnosis from the center lines on the highway dragged me deeper into thought. 1,000,000 lines away was Kelsey's house. One after the other, I counted them, knowing the higher the number got, the closer I was, the closer we were to having our family back. Hey, Lewis, I said, looking back at him through the rearview mirror. Lewis continued to sniffle and pout. Buddy, when we get to Mommy's, let's not tell her what happened in the park. Okay, but Lewis refused to look at me. It was going to be a long ride. When Kelsey and I got divorced, it was hard, but when she decided to pick up her life and move 5 hours away, it was even harder. I didn't understand her reasoning. I tried explaining that if she moved away, Lewis was going to have a difficult time acclimating to such a disjointed life, with his parents living in 2 different states. When the police inevitably found him, watching her hope demise was painful, and every reason I gave her to stay close to me was about to come to fruition in a grand I told you so moment. The sun was going down, and my heart began to palpitate as soon as we arrived in Kelsey's town. I had no idea what I was going to say or how she would react to Lewis's grand reveal. Like me, she was probably living a semi-normal life, wearing an attractive mask that exuded happiness, hiding the darkness underneath to get her through her days. With Lewis, we would rip her mask off her face and gift her all the smiles and happiness she deserved. We pulled into Kelsey's driveway. The walls of my throat were nearly bound together in anxiety. My breathing sputtered, and my chest tightened as I got out of the car to let Lewis out. With each step we took towards her door, Lewis dragged behind, pulling me back. He appeared to be more nervous than I was. I knocked on the door. My blood pressure, beating like a drum behind my ears, drowned out my knocks as I stood on Kelsey's front porch in agonizing anticipation. I held my breath as I heard the fumbling of the locks from the other side of the door. Lewis squeezed my hand tightly. The door opened. I was with my family. My breath was stolen from my lungs seeing Kelsey again. She looked stunning, absolutely divine. The only wrinkles that had found her face were the ones framing her screaming mouth as she hit the floor with excitement. The wrinkles quickly disappeared under the concealment of her left hand as she used her right one to scoot herself away from Lewis, and her shoeless, socked feet slipped on the floor trying to back away. I quickly jumped through the door and shut it behind me to turn down the volume of Kelsey's screams from the outside. Her actions were warranted, but the sounds were alarming. The public didn't know about Lewis's return, and the last thing we needed was snooping neighbors ruining our family reunion. Babe, I said, trying to get her attention. Hysteria was filling the room. I needed her to calm down. Babe, I know it's a miracle. I couldn't believe it either. Kelsey rose to her feet and started running away. I knew she was taken off guard, but I wished she could have calmed down enough to understand how her actions were making Lewis feel. The poor kid was terrified. I lunged toward Kelsey and grabbed her from behind. To hug her again thawed the frost in my heart and filled it with warm vitality. I could feel myself becoming whole again. Her arms and legs were flailing as I carried her over to the couch. When I sat her down, she began screaming for help until I threw myself on top of her, covering her mouth and restraining her, hoping I could calm her down. She continued fighting with me, digging her nails into my skin. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on to her. From across the room, Lewis stood in the corner shaking. Underneath my hand, Kelsey's screams faded into cries. Her body loosened up, wearing herself out under my restraint. Inside her chest, I could feel her heart beating in synchrony with mine. It was like we were in love again. "Honey," I said, "I'm going to take my hand from your mouth, okay? Can you promise not to scream?" Kelsey shook her head. Slowly, I removed my hand from her mouth. Our eyes connected. I could feel her breath on my face. It had been so long since being that close to her that I wanted to bathe myself in the moment. "I know this is tough." I was surprised too. I said, "I don't know what to say." Kelsey said, "There's nothing to say, but there's a lot we need to figure out." I turned to Lewis. "Buddy, come on over. Come say hi to Mommy." Lewis, a little shaken, walked over to the couch and sat between Kelsey and me. "I missed you, Mommy," said Lewis. Kelsey stroked Lewis's hair. "I missed you too, baby." My eyes began to well up watching Kelsey bury her face into Lewis's shoulder, wrapping her arms around him in a motherly embrace. I rubbed Kelsey's back with one arm and pulled Lewis in with the other. For the next 10 minutes, we sat in silence and cried together as a family. Sitting on that couch was magical. The decades spent falling into a dark, eternal hole had come to an end, and together we could have filled the pit with new memories. With each minute that passed by, I pulled my family in just a little tighter and felt the rekindling of love get a little stronger. I was never going to let them go. "Where did you find him?" Kelsey asked. "I didn't find him, babe. He found me. I tried calling you. Why didn't you answer?" I just didn't think it was real. Believe me, I know what you mean. I knew this day was going to come. I knew he was out there somewhere. I knew without a doubt he would come back and bring us back together. What should we do? I have no idea. This has all been a lot to take in. It's been driving me completely mad. I think we just need to take everything a day at a time and get accustomed to our new lives. Lewis looked at Kelsey and crawled into her lap. "Does this mean you and Daddy are back together again?" I chuckled as he stole the question right out of my mouth. Kids have no grace with their words. Although his delivery was much more blunt than mine, I stared at Kelsey waiting for her response. "Of course, baby," she said, kissing Lewis on the forehead. I wish there was a mirror around to see what a genuine smile looked like on my face when Kelsey answered Lewis. When she saw my smile, she placed her hand on top of mine. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers with hers and moved in for a kiss. Her velvety lips pressed up against mine made 25 years of my miserable life disappear. All of the sleepless nights, the painful cries, the vicious arguments, the crippling loneliness, it all ventured off into a place of non-existence. I was happy. I was never a religious man, but having my family sit with one another, shrouding each other with love made me think a God was out there somewhere casting its almighty fortune onto us. Perhaps God felt my terrible pain and undying hope that Lewis was out there somewhere in the universe, and by his almighty hand, God gave Kelsey and I a second chance at happiness. "Hey, babe," Kelsey said, "I'm going to go use the restroom. Do you need anything when I'm done? I bet you're starving." "No, my love. All I need is you and Lewis." As Kelsey stood up, I grabbed her lovely face and gave her a kiss. She dragged her hand across my chest as she walked away and went upstairs to the bathroom. I was living in a dream. While she was gone, I rocked Lewis back and forth in my arms, thinking about what the future held. I thought our lives together were a closed book, but it had been reopened with thousands of pages of chapters yet to be written. All the birthdays that were stolen from us, the sporting events, the graduations, there was far too much to be excited about for my tired mind to comprehend. I sat there waiting for Kelsey, thinking about her offer. Food did sound good. It certainly wasn't too late for us to go out and have our first family meal in 2 decades. Just the mere idea of our server asking if we'd like crayons and a coloring mat for Lewis made my smile even wider. Kelsey had been gone for a while, and I know how nauseous I felt when Lewis came knocking at my door. I went to go check on her. Her stairwell was covered in pictures of her life, but not one frame had a picture of Lewis. I knew she had lost hope. I couldn't wait for us to add family pictures to her collection. When I got to the top of the stairs, I heard whimpering from behind the bathroom door. I knocked on the door. "Sweetie, are you all right in there?" Kelsey shrieked from behind the door, "Get the hell away from me. Babe, what's wrong? I was entirely confused. Oh my god, he's at the door. He's at the door. Kelsey was violently crying. I beat on the door. Kelsey, what's going on in there? Please, Kelsey said. Please help me. Her last word faded out into her cries. Kelsey, open this door right now. Get the hell out of my house, you lunatic. Her words began to cut deep. I had no idea what was happening, but Kelsey was scaring me. Down the stairs, I saw the lower level illuminated with red and blue flashing lights. I couldn't believe what she had done. I was not going to let them take Lewis away from us. I started kicking at the door. Open this goddamn door right now. Kelsey, I would not allow her to tear this family apart. Open the door. I had lost my family once, and I wasn't losing them again. I need you, Kelsey. Lewis needs us. If she didn't need me, I didn't need her. Don't do this to me, Kelsey. If she had it in her cold heart to do this to me, to get me taken away from Lewis, she was about to see what I was going to do to her. I kicked the door, cracking it by the frame. The terror in her cries rattled through my brain. I kicked the door once more, her screaming masking the sound of it breaking open. She was crouched next to the toilet with her phone, still on the line with 911 in her hand. She was helpless. I ripped the towel rod off the wall as she begged for mercy. She didn't deserve my mercy. She deserved me and Lewis. If she didn't want to be a mother again, she could have said something. Our poor judgment led to this. I raised the rod over my head, my grip so hard my knuckle began to swell. None of this was my fault. If you don't need a life with me and Lewis, I said to Kelsey, her eyes red with fear, then you don't deserve life at all. The last thing I remembered from the bathroom was being deafened, and sharp pins and needles shooting through my legs. The ride in the ambulance was all a blur. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctor said I had been shot 5 times. He said it was a miracle that I had survived, but at that point, I was used to miracles. After some recovery and gaining my lucidity, I was visited by the police. They informed me that the man in the park perished due to head trauma. I explained the situation and claimed self-defense, but they weren't buying it. As for the scene I caused at Kelsey's house, I will be the first to admit I became a little aggressive at the thought of her taking Lewis away from me. But from what I understand, she is totally fine. A little rattled, but fine. It was a hard pill for me to swallow. When the police showed me videos from the park carrying around a child-sized mannequin dressed in Lewis's old clothes, even more alarming was the recording Kelsey took of me talking to her in a child's voice. All the evidence got me put in this miserable psychiatric hospital. None of it makes sense to me. It had to have been made up. Kelsey had to have framed me. Lewis was there. Lewis is still here. I demand an appeal immediately. I have no life, no freedom, nobody to love me. All I have is Lewis. He still comes to see me every night. Last night, he gave me this knife to help me escape. Transcribed on July 3rd, 2023, 2:11 p.m. Case number 12,833. Patient Spencer redacted. Cedar Grove Psychiatric Hospital.